And now, at this point, we have some conversations, topics that the rest of the Rotted Souls here have drawn up for me. I have no idea what these say. And we're going to have Nick come on up here. And we're going to pick a conversation point about horror movies at random. There you go, Tom. Come on. Hat stick. Hat doesn't want to stick. All right. So this is Professor Nick Schlegel.
Hey.
Welcome.
Hey, Mike. Good to be here.
All right. So this is the author of Sex, Sadism, Spain, and Cinema, a study on a period of Spanish horror films from about 1970 to 75, roughly.
I really look at about 10 years, 68 to 78, make it an even decade.
Okay.
Because 68 happened to be the year for the release of Mark of the Werewolf, and then 78 was the ratification of their sort of democratic constitution.
Right, and this is about the time that Franco was losing power, so horror movies were now being allowed, and it led to a huge influx.
Absolutely, yeah. Towards the end of the 1960s, Franco's health and his overall tether on Spain was slipping. This was a very prominent Western European power for centuries. The largest armada in the world for a brief period. In fact, for about 100 years, they were the most powerful nation in the world. But as quickly as they rose to that sort of prominence, is about as quickly as they lost it too, in the long view of history.
Right.
But currently in vogue at that time, here in the States and abroad, particularly in Europe, with the influx of Euro horror in France and Italy and other countries, Spain decided to sort of like officially endorse, if you were, that genre being made into production at that time. So it had no history with horror movies under Franco. It was a genre that was seen as subversive and only for idiots or demented teens or something like that,
right?
And dangerous too.
Yeah, and then we saw a progression of movies that were being made that didn't necessarily have the regulatory bodies overseeing them as we do now. I remember, based on your book suggestion, I watched Hunchback of the Morgue.
Favorite of mine.
Yeah. And that had a very disturbing scene in it, just because at one point the main character was entering into a room that had a corpse in it, and the corpse was being fed upon by rats, which angered him. He did not want this to happen, so he lit them on fire. And they were really on, I was watching that, I'm like, they didn't fake that. Oh my Lord. So that, just an interesting point in cinema history.
Yeah, and that wouldn't have been a problem then at all, really. I mean, the only thing that was seen as taboo was sex. This was 40 million Catholics. They had a strong board of censorship that was overseen by civil servants and Catholic priests. So things like rape and torture, cruelty to animals and things like that, this wasn't a problem in a fascist dictatorship.
Right.
Sex, however, was a big issue. So they would make two cuts. There was the domestic cut, which was clothed and not all that sexual, and no real nudity or anything like that. And then there was the international cut, which was the opposite. It included all the sex.
Right. Okay. Well, did you want to go ahead and discuss what we have here on this piece of paper I haven't read yet?
Sure.
All
let's
right.
go for it. Let's hope I'm up to things. I'm getting older, my vision's narrowing, perhaps. I don't know.
What we have here is most gory. So I'm assuming we want to discuss what movie has the most gore in it that we've seen.
Holy cow.
Generally?
I think that might have to get broken down into subdivisions maybe a little bit too.
I mean, there's
purposeful gore, or are we talking goofy gore?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm thinking like the entire world of gore, my pick would be Tokyo Gore Police. That was the point of it. But that got into pretty silly territory.
Right, it often does. It transgresses. There's so little that we actually have, Did you guys happen to see the recent Monster Mash video that's been going around?
No.
So it's sort of like it's a rebirth of the traditional, Boris Pickett Monster Mash, and he's like, well, I've been away for a while, so he comes back and does it. But then Lecter shows up and kills his date, and then Freddy Krueger shows up and he's like slashing virgins, and then and Saw comes up, he's like, I want to play a game, and they're like, what's going on here? You know, like what happens to the good old fashioned universal scares of the past? So today, I think when we get gore, because that violence has transgressed into an area that nothing's taboo anymore, I think they have to take it into the ridiculous. I mean, Raimi was probably the first person to come along with the original Evil Dead.
Yeah.
And kind of like fuse, sort of like a vaudevillian type of humor with
Yeah, that definitely got into
violence.
That definitely got into Three Stooges slapsticky areas. But even so, the gore. I mean, especially when we're talking Evil Dead 2, they were, bringing blood into the set by the oil barrel drum.
Yeah. Well, I'll chime in here. Let me think. The goriest film I've seen, probably something like, oh dear. Well, something like Salo is not really, it's not gory, but the amount of mental damage that's done. How about, all right, let's say
that still has, damaged me.
Yeah. I'll say something probably like Fulci's Zombie. I was in summer camp when that came out in the 70s, my friends and I, we went and saw it. Her older brother took us, and I think that was the first one that I saw gore in a way that was a 79, 78, something like that, that really affected me. So is it the goriest? No. Is it the goriest for me in my little cosmic universe? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's an interesting differentiation. Like, okay, you mentioned Salo. That is one where I had kind of this interesting thing happen to me where I host this is kind of what started all this. I host a Halloween movie marathon for my friends every year. And we happen upon one that, like, a lot of times I'll try to look at best of lists and integrate some of those into there so that I have some movies that I've never seen before. I like to be surprised during these things too. And we had one that was The Girl Next Door.
Oh dear. Oh man. Yeah.
And we finished watching that and we thought, okay, well, that was interesting and that was not a bad movie, but it wasn't necessarily scary. It wasn't Halloween-y. It wasn't, horror in the true sense, or the classic sense. So that got me thinking, what if I took those kind of movies and separated them out into their own marathon, which I affectionately call the effed up-a-thon. And Salo was an entry that made it into one of those.
Yeah.
So we watched that, March? We watched that?
Which one?
Salo, 120 Days of Sodom.
Oh, God.
Yes. That's generally the reaction that people get if they have seen the movie and are asked about it.
It's a remarkable film. And Pasolini is a remarkable director. I mean, and it's just that it's a tough slog.
Right. Yeah. No, it absolutely is. Well, I was mentioning Tokyo Gore Police.
Yeah.
I mean, that, like I said, got into the realm of silliness. I would say that is the goriest I've seen, just in terms of straight, blood and guts and so forth that actually appeared on the screen. I mean, you had a character in there that had his legs chopped off and inserted like adrenaline boosting needles into his stumps so that he could fly on jets of blood. It was ridiculous.
Fantastic.
It was worth a watch. I mean, it was actually a really interesting
What was Peter Jackson's zombie romp? I'm trying to remember the name of it. Dead
Alive?
Dead Alive, yeah. So Dead Alive is another one that just, it's like, how many gallons of blood are they going through? And it becomes very slapsticky.
Right. And I think almost in a way, I mean, if you're talking about gore and you're talking about that visceral fear level, I think that it almost detracts from that. I think that having simpler, more intimate type of, gore shots, it raises that cringe factor. Like, I mean, it's not a horror movie, but 127 hours? I mean, you're talking about gore there.
Self-mutilation.
Yeah, if you're talking about visceral, wow.
And Saw is, the Saw franchise with that sort of forced bodily mutilation is also, I always felt that the Saw franchise, a lot of its message was lost on the larger mainstream public, which is a real pity because
Jenny is a big fan of the Saw.
As am I. I think that there's a tremendous amount there. It's one of the few franchises where the sequels are imaginative and well deployed. And the problem with it was, I think once it got tethered to the torture porn sort of phenomenon, parents just looked at it and saw them as, vile and baseless, and that larger message, I think, was lost, which is a pity because it had a really fantastic message.
It was a very interesting message. It's not, I mean, it's one that I've seen before in horror, but even so, it was executed very well, I thought. Okay, well, that does it for discussion number 1. Thank you for joining us, Nick.
Sure, my pleasure. I'm going to go back and have a seat over here.
Go for it. Have a bottle of water if you want.
Yeah, I would like a bottle.
All right. Just to reiterate, if you are in the Alfred area, if you're a student of Alfred State, Alfred University, you want to pop on by, we are live until 4 o'clock at Alfred University in the second floor of the Powell Campus Center. You want to come by, we have some candy, we have some giveaways, and we're going to have a quiz contest for students if you want to join in on that. It's going to be kind of horror movie trivia. So